Welcome back to another episode of Soul Focus Radio. We're your hosts, Martina
and Cindy.
Today is Sans Martin, so you're going to have a conversation with the two of us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. This is our first time, I think, just you and I being on.
I know, I'm excited. A ladies' night.
Yes, and how are you doing, Martina?
I'm doing well. We all had COVID this week, so we're just recovering, but luckily it wasn't too severe for us, so I'm grateful for that.
Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad that you guys are recovering. I remember when I had it, it was rough the first time. I've had it twice now. The second time wasn't too bad, but the first couple days were still pretty rough. So I'm glad Makeba wasn't, too affected by it.
Yeah, me too. She definitely, I think, fared the best of all of us. So that was good to see.
Yeah, and I think with kids, they don't get as affected as adults do. I remember when my kids had COVID, like July of 2020, all they had was a fever, and then that was it. No other symptoms.
Yeah, that's what Makeba had too. It was pretty much just a fever and now like a little cough, but nothing severe. I think the other thing I realized is I just haven't been sick in the last 2.5 years. Like I haven't had any colds or anything. So it was also just really weird to have a cold again. It was just very foreign. I didn't miss it at all.
That's so interesting considering, you work in healthcare and you're constantly around sick people. How do you keep your immune system so strong and healthy?
It's interesting. I wouldn't know. I don't know if I would say my immune system is so strong and healthy. I would just say I'm super diligent about wearing an N95 at work all the time.
Yeah. Okay.
But I also sleep a lot. Even though I have a baby, she's a really good nighttime sleeper, and she will only sleep if I'm with her. So it gives me an excuse to get also a lot of really good nighttime sleep. So I'm pretty grateful.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
That's nice.
When you come to the Soul Focus Group, you come to an acknowledgement that there has been injuries done to us from all these different forms of oppression. Injuries that have impacted our subconscious mind, our heart, our spirit, our very soul. So at the Soul Focus Group, we recognize that and we focus on healing. Healing, the return or the recovery of our connections to our healthy self, our beautiful thinking mind. We want you to come join us in a movement of healing all around the world to restore us back to our rightful state. At the Soul Focus Group, we heal.
Well, today it's kind of linked in with this. We're going to talk about self-love. Seems like it ties into this, though, talking about healing and taking care of ourselves. So
yeah,
what do you say?
Self-care. I feel like self-care and self-love, they go hand in hand too.
Right. Like you have to have self-love to be able to implement self-care.
Definitely. And sleep, getting lots of sleep is critical with self-care. That's one part that I feel like I neglect is getting enough sleep. And that's probably why my immune system is like so shot, But anyways.
Well, you're juggling so much. A mama of 3 and all the work you do with local hoops and with Soul Focus groups. So I always am in awe of how much you do.
Well, thank you. Thank you. The feeling is mutual. Well, anyways, let's get into this conversation of self-love. Let's just start with, the basics. Like when you think of self-love, what comes to mind?
So honestly, the first thing that comes to mind for me when I think about self-love is it's almost like this forbidden love for me. Like it feels really selfish. Like my first gut instinct is that's really selfish and it's almost shameful. and I definitely want to talk more about that, but those are honestly my first gut feelings when I think about self-love. How about for you?
For me, self-love, I feel like it ties a lot into self-acceptance
Hmm.
and, just like being your own best friend. And, how, all of our lovely family and facilitators at the Soul Focus group would say it's like being on your own side,
Hmm.
right? And I think for so long during my younger years, I don't, I would talk down to myself. I'd be very critical. And I think that's just like my upbringing, as an Asian American woman. I was just used to being criticized a lot,
Hmm.
and I know it's not out of malicious intent or, not because like they didn't love me, but just being critical of me because they want me to be better, right? They
Hmm.
want the best for me. But there
Hmm.
were ways that it happened that didn't really fill my cup. If anything, it felt like it kind of depleted my cup.
Hmm. Wow. It's so interesting that you kind of referenced your background because, I don't know if our listeners know this. I'm half Asian, I'm half Chinese. And that's, I think, where a lot of my own feelings too of like, you shouldn't have this idea of self love. Like it's selfish, it's shameful. I think a lot of that comes from things that weren't necessarily explicitly said, but I felt like kind of there was this implicit belief or feeling behind that in kind of the Asian culture. Like I can't say that my dad or like I grew up with my Chinese grandmother ever were like super critical, but it just kind of, I don't know, there was just like this vibe of like, you're supposed to always be doing for others. I don't know if that felt for you like that self criticism, or not that self criticism, but the criticism took that form for you in your family.
Yeah, I definitely can relate, that you should be doing for others. I feel like in our Asian culture, they're very, and this is just based off of my upbringing, it's like you want to serve, right? Like they want the women to serve. So whether
Mm-hmm.
that be serving the children or the husbands or the elders, I felt like there was an expectation that as a woman, you should be of service always. So, like if guests are coming over, elders come over, you sit them down, grab the teacups, serve them tea, right? Kids come over, you serve their plates, they're the first to eat. It's like you're always the last person, that you serve.
Yeah. Right. It's like super taboo to serve yourself first at the table. That feels like, oh, it almost makes me like cringe.
Right, right. And if you were to just sit down first with just your plate and start eating, and everyone's just going to look at you like, what are you doing?
Oh, yeah. That's a big no no. Well, and I think it's so interesting because I think there's this, again, for me, how I internalized it, this idea that being in service of others means you can't also be in service of yourself. Like in my mind, they're mutually exclusive, but I don't think they have to be, right? Like we can be in service of others, but that doesn't mean we can't also take care of ourselves and have that self love.
Yeah. And I think in order to be in service of others, we have to serve ourselves first, right? And I've mentioned this before. It's like you can't pour from an empty cup.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if you're not conscious of taking care of yourself and putting yourself first, putting your mental health, your physical health, your psychological health, right? Spiritual health.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many realms to it, but like if you're not putting yourself first, I feel like you're going to deplete yourself and then you can't show up for others the way that you would like to.
So, Cindy, I'm really curious, what has that journey looked like for you coming from a place where there was a lot of criticism to what you said, this being in a place of self acceptance and being 100% on your own side?
To be completely honest, I don't really feel like I had much self-love for myself until like maybe like the last 2 years once I started working with the Soul Focus group. And it sounds crazy because
Mm.
I'm now 31 years old. But like I've, since working with the Soul Focus group and being mentored, by everybody, shout out Dustin, Madi, Martin. You guys have been great mentors. Also you, Martina, and just everybody at the Soul Focus group. I felt like the last couple of years, I've been able to do a lot of deep self-reflection and being very intentional with my time and my energy and being on my own side, right? And so through self-reflection, I realized I was very critical of myself. I realized that I was a huge people pleaser, right? Like I always wanted to, like, I was just like so extra, right? So like if I'm friends with somebody, like I will do anything and everything for them just to make sure that they feel my love, right? And know that they're supported. And, like Cindy's got your back. Anything you need, like Cindy's got you. Right. And, I would do that for so many people. And then, I don't do it because like I want them to do it, not because like I expect them to do it for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I do it because it makes me feel good. But I've noticed that my efforts, they sometimes don't get reciprocated.
Mm.
And, once I like reflect on that, it kind of it's a little disappointing, right? To feel like I'm doing so much for others, but then I don't feel like I receive it back in return.
Right.
And then, it kind of just leaves me in like this like weird funk, right? Where I'm like, oh, I just don't like the way that feels. And I just noticed that I did a lot of people pleasing. And so now, I call it like, it's weird, right? Because going back to what you said, like it's when you think of self-love, it's like, what did you refer to? It's like taboo. It's not
like shameful almost.
Yeah, shameful and selfish. Like I
Selfish.
called this my villain era. Right. I was talking to Dustin a couple of months back and I was like, D, like I'm in my villain era. Like I have placed boundaries and I've stopped people pleasing, and the people that I was pleasing and didn't have boundaries with did not like it. And I was at a point where I just didn't care if they liked it or not. And I was like, we said our goodbyes because it didn't work out. And I was like, I just feel like I'm in my villain era. But it's like, why? Why does self-love and holding boundaries have to be considered as like a villain era?
Right. Yeah, no, totally right. Like it seems kind of crazy. Like we wouldn't ever tell our kids, don't take care of yourself, right?
Right.
But I totally get what you're saying of like it feels so wrong to prioritize oneself first. Just like you're saying, like it's like serving your own plate first just feels like that just makes me so uncomfortable, the thought of it.
And that just goes back to like our socialization, right? Like it's just like this full circle.
So I'm curious how, because for me, like something I actually really love and value about my cultures is that respect for elders. And like I grew up very close to both of my grandmas. So my Chinese grandma lived with us for 17 years. And at the end of her life, my family and, I was in high school, we were pretty intimately involved in caring for her. And I attribute a lot of that experience to actually why I went into medicine. And then my other half is German. My German grandma, like I went to go live with her when I was 12 for a summer and helped, at least in my mind, I took care of her. I don't know if I really did, but I perceived myself as being a caregiver in some capacity. And so I really value that, caring for others, caring for our elders, caring for our children. And I'm trying to find that balance of how do I still value those things without making them like negate my own value. And so I'm curious for Cindy, Cindy who is in a space of self-love, how do you see your care for others manifesting differently now that you're more in a place of self-love? Because we know that, you're a total caregiver, you're a mom, you're a partner, you're always checking in on other people. And that just seems like a part of at least how I see you. I don't see you as not caring for others anymore. So I'm curious, what does that look like for you? And what does that feel like for you now that you're doing it more in a place with self-love present?
In a sense of like serving that's something that I'm going to continue to do. Like, it makes me feel good to be able to serve like the people that I love, right? So like my family and my friends, my partner, even my parents, right? Like I'll still always make their plate first because, that to me, like it feels good, right? But in a sense of like self-love and caring for others, I've just been very intentional with who I do it for, right? And before I don't really feel like some of the friendships or the relationships were two-sided. It was very one-sided. And so now I'm just very intentional that, the people that I engage with, it's mutually beneficial, right? And not in a sense that like I expect material things from somebody, but it's just like, pour into me. I'll pour into you, you pour into me, whether that be pour into like my emotional health or my physical health, like come work out with me or let's have a great conversation, mental stimulation, just, ways like that where we're pouring into each other, versus it just being one-sided.
I mean, that what you just described sounds like human solidarity to me.
Yeah, and solidarity with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with going back to, your upbringing, what are the effects of not having, I guess, like a positive outlook or not having self-love for yourself? Not saying you don't have self-love for yourself, but like it seemed like your vision or what came to mind originally was very negative. So like, how do you see that playing out over your years as a teenager or as an adult?
Yeah. I mean, it's something I think I still struggle with. I think so I would say my parents are extremely generous and they are a model of like providing for others. And so I feel like they very much poured into me a lot with not this expectation that I'm going to do these things for them. Like I've offered for my parents to move in with us and that we take care of them, and they have clearly declined that multiple times. So it's not like this relationship where they're like, "Oh, we've done this for you, now you have to do this for us." But I think where I see it right now playing out the most is kind of in the relationships with people closest to me, where I feel a lot of guilt if I do anything for myself. And so and I'm thinking specifically like with my partner, with my husband, if he doesn't say and really insist, like, you need to go do this for yourself, like I won't do it. And then I get really, really burnt out. And
Yeah.
it creates that tension in our relationship because I almost feel like I need someone else to validate it, that I
Yeah.
deserve to do XYZ. Like I need someone else to really validate, yes, you deserve to have like a girls' night. When really I should just be able to say, hey, I'm having a girls' night. And he'd be like, cool, I'll
Right.
watch the baby. But I feel so guilty. And that comes from totally 100% within me.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely think I'm still working on that like I deserve these things that give me life. And then how do I not need the validation from someone else to say, yeah, you deserve that. And I'm going to like support you, not even support, but like push me to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And would you say that like your, I guess like your need for validation, like does that come from like you just wanting to be home with, like Makeba and your partner? Like, do you think this is like a motherhood kind of thing, or has it always been even before having a child together?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a little bit of both. I think there's definitely the mom guilt is like an extra layer. And
Yeah.
like you said, I think like implicitly society has told me like as a mother, I should be doing the most for my child, like more than any other person in her life. And if I'm not, then maybe I'm not a good mom. So I think those are messages I've internalized and need to process. So I definitely think there's an element of mom guilt, like any moment away is me not being a great mom. And then I think a part of it too is just just that not feeling like my own self-care, which is a manifestation of self-love, is worthy. Like I feel like I have depended on other people telling me you need to take care of yourself.
Yeah. Wow. I've been there. I've definitely been there. And, I agree. Like, even before having my first child, I did feel weird. Like, it was like, hey, I'm going to have a girls' night, because I don't know. I think you're right. Like, that guilt of just being away and not being at home and spending time with your partner and like being, also in like that wifey, doing the wifey duties. Right. But yeah, I mean, that mindset has definitely shifted, because I've seen how that's played out for me, after I had KJ, and like I wasn't really prioritizing self-care, right? So like I wasn't as active as I used to be, and before having KJ, I was a personal trainer.
Oh, wow.
So I was used to working out every day, almost 2 times a day. And then, having KJ, I barely worked out because I never wanted to be away from him.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I think just not working out, then I just started to feel really like crummy about myself, and my self-esteem was like shot, right? I didn't feel good. I didn't look good. So then I didn't feel good. And then it was just like really bad for my mental health. And so, once I realized what it was doing, I started implementing, like more girls' nights, more, signed up for a personal trainer, somebody to hold me accountable, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me to get out of the house. And it's just like, when you look at pictures, like I can tell like how unhealthy and unhappy I looked versus like being active, going out and filling my own cup and doing things that just made me feel good and happy, and just being with other people outside of your home.
Mm-hmm. I was just gonna say that, like, we're allowed and we're supposed to do that as moms. Like, I don't feel like society has the expectation that, yeah, moms should have time for self-care.
Yeah, and I don't really think that was something, when I was pregnant, that anyone has ever shared with me. It's like, you need to put yourself first, or you should prioritize yourself, right, for your well-being, because then your well-being will affect your child's well-being.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I feel like that's another conversation, that's a whole nother conversation of, mom guilt, motherhood, parenthood. We'll have to get a conversation with a whole bunch of parents on there. And but yeah.
Cindy, I'm curious if there's a time where you've felt like you've been in like an element of self-love, if people around you have noticed or commented. You made me think about that when you said our own well-being affects our children's well-being, and it made me think about a time where I was like really practicing self-love, and people could tell. Like, I got many comments about it, that just like, oh, your energy. So I'm curious if you've ever experienced that.
Oh, definitely. Especially with my partner and my children.
Mm.
Because usually after I have kids, postpartum kicks in, and I've had 3 C-sections, and so the recovery is a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But it's like, for me, I felt like after having each child, right, like being on my 3rd surgery and my 3rd child, I just like didn't have that motivation to work out or to really do anything, because I was so tired, and I did have really bad postpartum depression. And so I see how that played out with how present I was with my children, right? And even with my partner, like I was just extremely sad all the time. I felt like my life was just taking the kids to school, breastfeeding. I felt like breastfeeding is like it can be very tedious, right? Because if I'm not breastfeeding, I felt like I was pumping. And you're like, schedule. And so once I finally decided like, hey, I don't want to be in this rut anymore. It's time to get out of the house. The 3 kids will be fine. I'll go work out, and just started doing self-care things. I noticed that I was happier, and my kids noticed I was happier. And I was, I had more energy to be able to play with them, interact more playfully with them, and not interact in the sense that like mommy's tired. Yeah, I feel like it's like this energy, right? Like your frequency, like you just vibrate higher when you practice self-love and self-care and self-appreciation.
Absolutely. And it's palpable to people around us.
Definitely.
So, have you ever heard of a term called groundwater? Groundwater is another word we use at the Soul Focus Group that means subconscious programming. From the ages of 0 to 7, we are subconsciously programmed. So much information and choices and decisions are downloaded into our subconscious mind, and we begin to start living that life. And even though that life we're living is not the life we chose for ourselves, and it's not until we understand the impact of the groundwater, what the groundwater really is, that we begin to wake up to our own lives and begin to choose what we want for ourselves. At the Soul Focus Group, we bring you to that consciousness so that you can begin to choose the life you want to live for yourself.
So Martina, you mentioned that when it came to doing self-care, self-love things, it seemed like you needed outside validation. Where are you at now, with your self-love journey, with all of that? Like, do you find yourself being more self-motivated to like go do girls' night and take a bath for yourself, or, the self-care things?
Yeah, I think actually through this conversation, it's helped me realize how much I've relied on external validation, that I'm worthy of self love and that we should all have self love. And as I reflect on that and I think about, how does me having self love manifest? And like we've talked about, a lot of that is through self care. What I'm just realizing what I do, because I'm like, I'll be like, okay, internally, I'm like, I know I need some self care right now. I'm really tired or whatever. And then, but I'm waiting for someone externally to say, like, hey, go do this, right? Which is silly because people can't read my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But then what I'm realizing right now, what it manifests as is like all these little hint drops of like a little complaint here and there. I'll be like, oh, this complaint, whatever, and this complaint, all kind of trying to encourage someone else to say, okay, you need to go take care of yourself. Which for me is like so fascinating right now to realize that, because it's not really nice to be around someone who's complaining, I think. Like it kind of brings energy to a lower level. And then B, like how I don't know that people realize that these little like small comments mean that naturally they make that connection. Oh, you need to go like take a bath, or you need to go out and like go for a walk by yourself. So I'm just kind of expecting people around me to read my mind and read these little hints I'm dropping. When really all I should do, and what would take less energy, is for me just to say, hey, is there a good time for me to go for a walk by myself? And then do it. And like, gosh, how much easier is that than like this whole buildup of a day of like dropping hints and feeling like people aren't hearing me. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense, but that's my realization right now of what I do.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I feel like I can relate, like I feel like in the beginning of my relationship and the beginning of like my parenthood journey, like I would drop those hints, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, eventually it kind of led to a disagreement. And something that Kelly always says is closed mouth, don't get fed. Like you would say. And so ever since then, I'm just like, you know what? That's right. If I need something, I'm just going to speak up and be like, hey, I need to get out of the house. I've been cooped up in the house all day. And he'll be like, okay, go. Or he'll even tell me sometimes, like if he just sees me at home all day, he's like, hey, you need to get out of the house. Go work out. Go do something. But get out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I love that, you've had some time to reflect on that. And I'm excited to hear about next week, to see, hey, Martina, what have you done lately that was self-motivated, right? And not from an external validation.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you also kind of giving me some accountability to come back next week. And I'm actually thinking about it. I'm excited because I'm like, oh, there's a whole world of opportunity. I could spend energy on just doing the thing that will give me life.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I love that for you.
Thank you for this conversation.
And thank you as well. It's always a great time, always a great conversation.
My genius, my power, my optimal functioning. My genius, my power, my optimal functioning. Repeat after me. My genius, my power, my optimal functioning. That is the jingle of the Soul Focus Group, because we are dedicated to helping you recover your genius, your power, and your optimal functioning. We want you to recognize the unique way that you comprehend things, express yourself, experience, and create in the world. We want to help you recover your genius, your power, your optimal functioning.
Well, that was a really fulfilling, cup-filling conversation for me. How about for you, Cindy?
Yes. Every time you and I talk, I think, you and I are just able to relate so much on a wife, female, mother level. And so, I don't know, I feel like every time you and I talk, like it flows really well, and it's always very fulfilling. So I'm really glad that we were able to have this conversation today on self-love, and to remind each other that we deserve it, we're worthy, and we need to practice more of it.
Is there something that you're going to do to manifest self-love this week?
Well, tomorrow I'm leaving to LA for a girls' trip. So, on our itinerary, we have hiking, laying out at the beach, enjoying some really good food, and just good company. So, me, obviously, everyone knows I have 3 kids, right? And it's school season. It's just nice to get away and reset and be able to come back refreshed for my family.
I love to hear it. I'm excited for you for that trip.
Thank you. And what about yourself, Martina?
So I think it's a long weekend for me with work. Monday is Indigenous Peoples Day. So I think for the long weekend, I'm actually doing a girls' night that's next weekend. Some girlfriends who are also mamas, we're gonna do a pumpkin patch with the family, and then the dads are gonna take the kiddos, and we're gonna go out for dinner and some drinks and just have some ladies' time, which I think will be really nice. Like, I'm sure you can relate when you have a little one. I'm just excited to eat slowly.
Yes, and have adult conversations.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to hear it.
Thanks, Cindy. Well, we hope that you all enjoyed our conversation today about self-love, and it gave you some things to think about and reflect on, and hopefully you're finding ways to also manifest self-love this week and every week. Definitely check us out on soulfocusedgroup.com. See what we're doing. Grow with us on this journey of human solidarity. Feel free to like us on YouTube or on your favorite podcasting app.
And just remember, we hope that you stay safe, stay well, and stay soul focused.
Focused.